Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Andrew, shut the fuck up, you piece of shit. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride. GG, motherfuckers.
Ksharp was recently inducted into the ESL Hall of Fame for esports, largely for his impact on the game and his influence, quite similar actually as to why Heaton was one of the earliest names to get in, despite the fact if you were making like best players to ever play CS 1.6, Heaton wouldn't be in your top 5, probably your top 10. Ksharp likewise would not be in that list, but Heaton had the accomplishments of a top 5, top 10 player of all time, and he had the biggest name of all the CS 1.6 players. And then, likewise, Ksharp, okay, he was overrated a bit individually in terms of his actual play in official games on LAN. He also doesn't have quite as crazy a resume as Heaton, but you know what? For a North American player, he had a very good resume. He won a number of championships, majors. Just not for all of World Counter-Strike, and in terms of especially the latter day people in CS 1.6, people from like 2005 onwards who had played a lot more tournaments, had a lot more big placings, and played the game at a higher level, quite frankly. But as I said, impact, influence on the game. He definitely pioneered a certain style, was incredibly memorable, a very, very popular and famous player, easily top 5, top 10 most famous Counter-Strike player of all time. As Moses actually alluded to in the video of him getting Ksharp inducted into the Hall of Fame, in the game Dota, Defense of the Ancients, the sniper's name is Cardell Sharpeye in reference to Ksharp. Now, Ksharp is a player who played CS, Counter-Strike, from the very beginning. We're talking about the betas when he was quite a young guy. Famously, before we had Steam, you used to play over something called the One Network, and you had a One ID when you bought the game and you first started playing online that you were issued, and that number would stay the same your whole time before Steam came along. Famously, Ksharp's number was 1335, I believe it was, so it wasn't leaked, but it was 2 before that, which means that literally he was within the first 1400 people to actually like activate and start playing Half-Life Counter-Strike would have been coming out later. Now, in these very early days of competitive play, North American Counter-Strike was very, very different. They actually used to play really weird rules. That's like 7v7, and they used to play time limit in NA where they'd play like 20-minute halves and stuff. And so the scene was very sloppy back then, but Ksharp was in one of the best early teams, which is a team called CK3, Clan Killers 3. This was a team made up of some skilled players, but also some players. But at that time, since you had these massive teams and very long games, you'd have a massive roster of players, so you could play with different players in different games. Famously, this team, led by a guy called Big V, had some very preliminary sort of proto-tactics and kind of system, but even so, had a bunch of star players. In the early days, them and one of their rival teams, NHG, which featured a number of players, Morto, Bullseye, who would also play in CK3 at some point in time. There was an infamous game from the, I think it was a Fire in the Hall or RITD, something like this. Rumble in the Desert, I think that was. There was a match that was played, and Ksharp released his POV demo. This is back before there was HLTV demos, so you had to get POVs if you wanted to see a game. And Ksharp released a demo, which I'll link the video version of here, playing against NHG. I think it was in CS 1.0. And it was a crazy demo on train. He's no-scoping everyone. He's hitting lots of flick shots. And this started to build him up as an individual talent, an individual star name. He was the first true superstar name from the NA region. You had other amazing players like Rambo, amazing all-around game. You had someone like Big Dog, very, very strong skill set, amazing aim, very low sensitivity in the days before people had low sensitivity. You had a whole bunch of skill players. Kane from Tau and DOP had really nice aim. But Ksharp was the first one who caught on, who kind of lit the public's imagination on fire. It also helped that as well as having a few POV demos that came out and being in the best teams, he had the mystique that comes with being the quiet kid, something that Forrest had for many years, where you don't give many interviews, you don't comment on things, you're not publicly saying things at the time on forums or in the modern day on social media. And so the fact that you're so insanely good as well and you're quiet makes people even more interested. They want to know more about you. They're drawn in a little bit more. There was also another quite famous demo that he released at the time. There's a video of it here, which was the Never Nuke demo, which is a very short demo in which he plays a public game, and he goes and he basically directs the entire public server. Yes, the players are going to look really bad, but that's just what people were like back in like 2000, 2001. Now, his first big event on LAN was the Babbage's CPL, which was one of the first CPLs to have Counter-Strike as a tournament at it. It was still an unofficial tournament at the time. He went with CK3 Blue, which had teammate Big Dog, teammate Bullseye, future X3 players, but then it had a bunch of the other players. It wasn't that great a team overall. It's one of the first big LANs. His team didn't do well. They just finished top 8. But out of that, next year they formed a team called X3, Extreme 3. And what happened was, this took the best, the youngest, the most dedicated players from CK3, trimmed a lot of the fat of like the older guys who had families and were just playing for fun and playing the odd online game. And it made a team that was trying to be professional, was trying to be elite level and go to all the big LANs. Now, having the best players basically in North America in this team, like there wasn't really any player outside except maybe Kane, who you could say was of the same level as them. They had all the best players together. They dominated. They won the Domain of Games online league. They won when that changed to Cal Invite, which is the top online league. They won the first 2 seasons of that with relative ease, rarely ever losing even a game, despite the fact they were playing a very free-for-all style, and so Ksharp was in an element. This is CS 1.1 to 1.3. These were versions of Counter-Strike where you could play a very individualistic game. You could move a lot more, you could dodge a lot more, weapons fired, draw rate was a lot quicker to come out, you could switch between them faster. There was a lot to exploit if you were an individual star. So in this era with X3, they were the dominant team in NA by far. They won the Speakeasy CPL, then Moto left, joined DOP. The rival team, they still beat DOP anyway, won the CPL Invite tournament. They won CPL 4-year anniversary tournament. These are North American only tournaments except Speakeasy CPL, which had some Europeans, but not the top Swedish team, crucially, which at the time would have been NIP/Team 9. They'd stayed at home. So by the end of the year, we had the first true major in CS 1.6, which was CPL Winter, and this was the one where you had the 2 best teams of the big regions meet. You had NIP come over from Europe, admittedly with a different lineup, and you had X3 come, who dominated the whole year. Now, when they met, famously, NIP won the upper bracket match on Train. In the final, X3 would have been required to win 2 maps against NIP. The first game, both games would have been played on Nuke because there wasn't a veto system back then. The maps were pre-assigned based on where you played someone in the bracket. On the first game of Nuke, the guys from X3 were able to win, I think that was the overtime game. And this is another game that really helped build Ksharp's fame. At the time, they couldn't have the name Ksharp in because it was a tournament where they made them play with the surname, so it was X3 Miller. But there's a video here that was a very short one, and it looks like shit because HLTV didn't even draw the gun models on back then and didn't show the spray very well. But he went absolutely ham in the first half of this game, where on CT side of Nuke, he went 21-8 in frags. By the end of the game, he dropped a 30 bomb. And this isn't in the days where you got frags for planting the bomb or defusing. This is like pure frags, 30 frags in a game. That's an MR12 game. Admittedly, went to overtime. It's still pretty nuts stuff. And he was against the best Europeans, amazing players like Heaton, Potty, Hib. These are fantastic levels of players. Now, after this, X3 started to fall apart because in online play, they lost the next Cal Invite finals. Then in Cal Invite Season 4, the team just fell apart entirely, lost a bunch of times. Before the season could even end, the team split apart, initially just on a break because some of the players didn't want to play as much. Ksharp initially went and joined a team called Darkside, where he was playing with players like Jaden, DeBears, from what I remember. Now, those players would end up forming a new team, which was, of course, Team 3D. And Team 3D was some of his X3 teammates, so Rambo, Bullseye, and then Ksharp. But then they added in DeBears and Jaden, who just played within Darkside, but who'd also be on a team called Elite Underground EU, who I think had finished 17th to 4th last CPL, but a very stacked CPL, so that was actually a decent enough result. Now, online, this team looked really good, but now we'd changed to CS 1.5. It was a less individualistic game. You had to start introducing elements of strategy, and this team didn't really do a lot of that. They thought it was like X3. They could just free-for-all, play off individual skill. Hey, we've got Rambo and Ksharp. We'll win this shit, right? They went to the CPL summer event in 2002, and they bombed out in 17th to 24th place. This was a big start of the narrative of the De Beers curse. But for someone like Ksharp, this was a massive humbling moment. He'd always been top placing in big CPLs. His team, he'd just been on a massive run of mega streaks, being the number one dominant team in NA. Now he's finishing 17th to 24th, and the losses here, one of them to F0, an Australian team, was to win rank outside, and nobody thought this was possible. So this was a very humbling moment, and it caused Team 3D to make a move where they brought in old in-game leader. Well, he hadn't been in-game leader when he'd been next 3, but he'd wanted to be in-game leader Moto to do proper strats. They brought in Kane, one of the best players from outside of the X3/3D team. These are both players from TSO. And they brought in Steel, a Canadian who'd won the World Cyber Games with LND and who'd been playing in GX and had a top 8 finish at the CPL. Now, they actually started off not that great because they went to the World Cyber Games and they didn't win a medal. They actually placed pretty poorly. But that winter, CPL winter 2002, a year after the major at which he'd lost to NIP in the final, Ksharp won his first major in CS 1.6. He won this CPL. They even played a variant of that NIP team in the SK lineup that they beat in the upper semis, I think it was. And then in the final and upper final, they beat Game Online, who had Hib from NIP and also had legendary players like Element. And so they won a major. Now, admittedly, Ksharp wasn't the best player of this major. The MVP of that one, I believe, actually was officially even given to Rambo, and I would have given it to Rambo as well. Rambo was the better player at the time. But Ksharp was certainly a good player. The next year, 3D had some up and down performances, but they managed to still have a very good finish. They were top 3 at the big stacked CPL with the most prize money of any CPL. They went to World Cyber Games. This time they made good on their World Cyber Games campaign. They won a silver medal, losing to SK, former NIP players in the final. They went back home, they had a terrible CPL. This is where the CPL started to really lag for the Team 3D squad, and they started to chop and change players, and it took them a long time, actually till after Ksharp's period, till at the CPLs they righted the ship and they got things back on track to be a top contender again. So, after this, the next year, Team 3D had a poor start to the year. They didn't qualify for ESWC. They had a really poor performance at a tournament called Everlan. Then again, they bombed out CPL, didn't even finish top 12 for a second CPL, but they got to the qualifier for the World Cyber Games again, a continuing trend. And again, they had a strong performance. This time, the one that was condition 0, they won the World Cyber Games. They beat SK Gaming in the semi-finals. They beat Denmark's The Titans, who were the ESWC champions, in the finals. Again, I wouldn't say Ksharp was the MVP of this major win. I'd have probably picked Volcano at the time, or Moto. I think these were players who more reasonably should have been considered. But he won another major, and this time wasn't CS 1.6, but it was close enough. So his second major overall. CPL winter result wasn't very good. It was just 8th place. Then next year, they made some drastic changes that weren't very good, quite frankly. They got Dominator and CBZ, mainly because CBZ, both players coming from TSG. TSG had been a better team than 3D at the time, but crucially, CBZ was just close friends with Ksharp, and so he got this guy into the team. CBZ wasn't really cut out for it. Dominator was a good player. They had a poor performance at ESWC, but by the end of the year, they started to get things together. They were able to get actually Shagwa and Method from NOA when NOA split up, and they'd been one of the best teams in the world, won a major themselves. They got them into the lineup and went to the World Cyber Games. Obviously, Shagwa wasn't playing. And they repeated their feat. They won another medal at the World Cyber Games, this time another gold. Admittedly, this one was in CS Source, so not really as cool, but interesting piece of trivia. In the final of that World Cyber Games, Ksharp played against a very young Adren from K23, K23, a Kazakhstani team. So the same Adren that won a major in CSGO last year in 2017 with Gambit. So you can see how you can span the eras here. After that WCG win, because they had these other players in the lineup and they were already looking at how many they was going to keep, they didn't have a great CPL. It was a very stacked CPL and they only finished top 12. Then you got a scenario though where Ksharp just basically retired quietly in early 2006, but when the next year CGS came around, he'd played Source, he liked Source, he came back and he played for the Team 3D franchise, which is the 3D New York franchise. They weren't one of the top teams. He was just okay in CGS, quite frankly. He wasn't a top player. After that, he essentially retired. He just played a little bit of Source online sometimes. Hasn't been seen competitively since. Has come back in CSGO to play some show matches. He actually played a show match in 2011 at IEM New York when they first showed off CSGO, where they had a bunch of ex-pros and current pros at the time play it. He also, people forget this, because everyone forgets this, played in that IEM San Jose show match in 2015. You know, the event that Navi won, beating TSM in the final, and where G2 was the first event where they had AZ there. And it was one, by the way, where Team Liquid used More as a stand-in, and Virtus Pro didn't have snacks and instead had to use, I think, Mihu at the time, and didn't do very well. Obviously lost to Team Liquid. This was actually the one where they had a show match where it was Anders Maniac and Henry G. Henry G was very new to the analyst seat at the time and the commentary team versus an NA team of Moses, Ksharp and Semler. And what happened was the NA team lost, and it was the one that had the pie bet. So famously, everyone remembers Moses got pied. They forget Semler got pied, which is pretty key. But they also never remember that Ksharp got pied. There's actually a video of it here. Zeus of Navi, who even says that you're a very good 1-6 player, pies him on stage. Now, Ksharp's skill set and style. Okay, so skill set, he had a very strong flicking style of AWPing. He was never a guy that like tracked or set up the shot as much. He flicked onto them because he had that much confidence in his aim, which was pretty good, and he had a fairly fast sensitivity at the time. He was amazing at no-scopes, especially before some of the nerfs that were around 1.5 and where they made it so you couldn't flick between the AWP and pull it out very fast. When he could pull it out very fast and just no-scope the guy instantly before the AWP had fully pulled out, he was one of the best at that, and it made him incredibly dangerous. He had a really strong deagle, like one Deags was pretty good. He had good rifles, at times very good early on, but beyond version 1.3, he wasn't really world-class with his rifles. And sadly, one aspect that I think is a real knock on him personally, despite being an all-time great player, he's not that high up the all-time great player list, in part because he didn't have as many big performances, but crucially, because his best weapon was the AWP, and when he got to LANs, he didn't often use the AWP, quite frankly. He used to play a bit more timid on LAN, whereas online, in matches in NA, he'd just go hog wild and do some amazing shit, as everyone remembers from, for example, that IWA game, where he had all those clips on Dust 2 that were in frag or die. So sadly, he didn't really use the AWP as much as I thought he should have, and I thought that actually, I won't say it's like cowardice, but I thought it was a little bit unduly timid. I think he should have gone balls out and just try to be a top AWP. But a lot of top players at the time didn't AWP as much on LAN. You played a lot less rounds. Pistol rounds were a lot more important. Buying an AWP was a big risk. A lot of people just stuck with rifling instead and tried to make that work. Part of this is tied to his mentality though, because he's someone who played a lot of other games. Half-Life, Deathmatch, World of Warcraft, EverQuest. He was playing everything but CS a lot of the time. When he did play CS, he played a bit in the officials. He played a bit to keep his ship together, but he wasn't like the most dedicated player. He mainly played because he enjoyed the game, because it was fun. He wasn't even as disciplined as a player in terms of style. And as I referenced earlier, he actually wasn't that sick on LAN, quite frankly. After the first few after the first sort of year and a half of attending big LAN tournaments, he wasn't actually the best player on 3D or X3, 3D rather, pretty much ever. And his rep would make you think he must have been insane and must have been some like Lionel Messi type guy. He wasn't really. He was more of just like a decent player and a solid enough player, but not a superstar like take over the game type player, and didn't have lots of that games where he had big takeover performances, and quite frankly, because he didn't AWP. As a player, generally an aggressive player, guy who likes to take aim duels, has pretty good first bullet aim. Now, the size of his name is huge, and part of it is, yes, his playing style was incredibly infectious, intoxicating in terms of online games and the POVs he released. He was also, as I said, the first player who really attracted that fan attention in NA. People were obsessed with this guy on Gotfrag. I mean, famously, they used to have this really stupid joke they would say where they would say like Ksharp, more like Gay Sharp, which is like, kind of shows you what the mentality of the scene was like. That it was very immature. Famously, people always had this tagline where they said, just use Ksharp. So when people asked what config should I use, and they had nothing special about his config. In fact, no pro players did at that point in time. There was no HLTV. So actually, he's one of those people who very cleverly managed his career in terms of POV demos. He wouldn't just release POV demos when he played a big Cal invite match. He'd only release a rare few demos in the early days, the first 2 or 3 days when people were most obsessed with him, and they were always straight piff. Like, there were ones that were just like the Riot Squad demo on Dust 2, the IWA one I talked about before, the couple of demos in the early days. These were all demos where he was going absolutely fucking ham, wrecking the opponent completely. And so as a result, when people only see those clips, they're going to think that that's your level all the time, and they're going to somewhat romanticize how insane you were as a player overall. As a result, even European players in the days before HLTV demos had seen some of these demos and were like, wow, he's so sick. And then because his team had a lot of success after the period where he wasn't that much of a star player, he was the biggest name, and so he was able to ride that success. In reality, over their entire careers, I think Rambo was a much better player, a much better big LAN performer and more of an MVP candidate. In the early days, I think even when Ksharp was insane, as a flashy style player, he was very, very good. But I think, for example, in the X3 days, that Big Dog absolutely was comparable to him. Fantastic skill set, much more consistent to some degree. But famously, Big Dog had his own big moment that ruined it for him, where because he was the guy who got exploited a lot in that final against Nip, people just remember that he had his issues there. So Ksharp, all-time great NA player, certainly. Very decorated, accomplished a lot. Very skilled player, actually. In terms of raw ability and skill, I think one of the best to ever play Counter-Strike. But a little bit overrated in some senses. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.